There's actually what's called familial trafficking, and that's where your family sells you. It can happen with runaways. It can happen blackmail trafficking, which my friend Teresa Flores, back a long time ago in Michigan, she was trafficked out of her house at night while she was in high school. But typically there's some reason that there's vulnerability. So especially if you're a runaway or if you've had some traumas at home that, and there's things that you can have trauma that will make you more vulnerable. And people identify these masterminds are evil, they identify, they see these vulnerabilities, and then they'll say, oh, I'll buy you that. It could be buy you that cool pair of shoes, even starting with that. And then they turn around and say, now you need to repay me.
Welcome to Authentic Conversations. I'm your host, Ryan James Miller, and I believe the way to freedom, fulfillment, and success ultimately comes by living as the most authentic version of yourself. If you're ready to live the life you've dreamed of, you're in the right place.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Authentic Conversations. I am here today, and my guest with me is Sue Flynn. Sue, interestingly enough, the first time that I met her was at a conference a couple of months ago. We were in Miami for an employee benefits conference, not concert. That would have been interesting if we were at a concert for employee benefits, but a conference. And we got talking over cocktail hour. And as we started talking, I was so intrigued by part of her story that I thought, man, this is just such a great discussion to have for other people to hear about. So we will get there in just a second. But for now, Sue, welcome to what you just told me is your first ever podcast recording.
Yes, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me. And happy birthday. Sorry, I have to throw that in.
Yeah, for all of you, by the time you hear this...
It's not your birthday.
Yeah, it won't be my birthday anymore. But if you want to send gifts, just know that the day we recorded, March 28th, 2023, is my 45th birthday. And so if you missed it, you can just send gifts after the fact. I'll take them all.
See, I had to plug your birthday because that's the best way to get the later gifts.
I love that. It will be really cool if just one random gift shows up in my mailbox in like 2 months. That will be pretty amazing. And I'm going to come back soon. And I'm going to thank you for that. That's going to be so awesome. Okay, so we were talking over, again, cocktail hour, I don't even know how we got on the discussion, but you brought up the fact that you are on a board and you are advocating in this organization around the idea of, or really the travesty of, human trafficking. And so while I'm sure we would both love to talk about the employee benefits work you do and how intriguing that is, I feel like this is so much more, not just interesting, but I think it's so critically important because this season of my podcast, we've been talking a lot about wounds and how people's past, their hurt, their heartache, their tragedy just impacts their life today. And this is an area where I think a lot of people are really ignorant to just how devastating human trafficking is and how many people it has impacted that live in the United States and even in some of the most affluent areas that we're a part of. So maybe just start off by sharing, how did you find yourself in that space of human trafficking, or advocating for that, I should say?
Yeah, it's kind of a different story. I really had no interest in it and really honestly didn't even know anything about it. But this was back in 2009 when really the word human trafficking wasn't as mainstream as it is now, which I have to say, I'll toot my own horn a lot today because that was one of our things, was awareness and education. And we went from people seeing an article and calling me like, hey, I saw what you were talking about a couple weeks ago, to now it's in the news every day. So there's been some great progress with that. I was in the junior league and I joined the advocacy committee because I wanted to work on the issue of childhood obesity. At that time, it was another area that we're working on. And we kind of, right as I joined, changed from multiple issues to really centering on a couple because there's only so much you can work on at one time. Yeah. And that was human trafficking. And it was a great platform where we really started with education for our own group. And basically, we were lucky enough to be well respected in the state of New Jersey. And we had even a couple federal agents and immigration agents come in and train us on what human trafficking was. And in the next couple of years, if you'll recall, the Super Bowl came to New Jersey. And we used the opportunity of having the Super Bowl for education and awareness, and also our state legislators. And we started focusing on the Human Trafficking Protection, Prevention, and Treatment Act, which we were able to have passed as one of the strongest laws in all of the United States, making New Jersey a leader of human trafficking services at that time, because the legislators and everybody was focused on improving our state for the Super Bowl.
Okay, so we're not going to glaze over that. It was kind of a backwards
way. Yeah,
we're not going to glaze over what you just said there, because now I remember this, like connecting some of these dots. Like, you were actually one of the authors of that bill, were you not?
Well, I was. So when you pass a bill, just because I'm a little bit anal with all this, and we want to share, it's just not me, it's a team of people. It's the Office of Legislative Services that write the bills, but we worked closely with them. We worked with some agents, some other agencies throughout New Jersey, and we were working with actually the Jewish Federation of Metro West, which was heavily involved with it. And we worked with them together to work on the legislation that was passed. So yes, we did brainstorming efforts, though. We used to have conferences and get everyone involved. And also, we are lucky enough to have some very strong survivors that have been very wonderful people to be advocates and help move things along.
Wow. Okay, so you go from work, like having a passion for obesity, childhood obesity, which obviously is such an important issue, but it's really a different type of issue. I mean, you go from something that is sometimes genetically induced, other times it's the result of not having the access to healthy food, proper health care. I mean, there's so many things around obesity, but you move into this domain that is always violent, that is doing great harm to people. So how was that transition for you? Did it just naturally I'm just going to do this now? Or was it something more than that?
I think it was more just the way I'm wired. When we started learning about it, and with a lot of the advocacy work, there's a saying when there's things where people are harmed is one life is too many, right? That's just like if one person, because with bills, advocacy, everybody wants numbers. And it's just like one person that's trafficked is too many. And when I started learning about it, and the thing that got me was like, no little girl would say, when I grow up, I want to be a prostitute or I want to be trafficked. And I just think I learned so much about it that, and I was lucky enough to be on a policy side of it. So I wasn't focused as much on what's going on day to day with these people. Although I was aware, but it was a way for me to know that the work I'm doing can help them. And it will have more opportunities to help more people with the proper legislation and the follow-up on the policies. And it's also a funny thing because when you're working on issues like this, if you're too involved, if you're on the street with them, you can be at risk too. So you have a wonderful opportunity, or I had a wonderful opportunity to make a big impact on people's lives and help save people and keep all of our crew that were doing the work, we're at a safe distance.
Yeah. And so did you feel like that kept you, I hate to use this word, but did you feel like that kept you disconnected enough that you were able to avoid some of the trauma that is involved with you? Because I've heard and talked to so many people that advocate in areas like this, and it becomes a traumatic experience for them too. So how?
Well, maybe I'm just different. I don't view it as traumatic. I do find that sometimes it's pretty difficult. For example, we're involved still with the SOAP project, where we go and do an outreach once a year. And we actually are having one coming up, which will be passed when this goes on, but it's on April 15th in North Jersey. And you go into hotels and you educate the hotels on trafficking, and you bring a poster of missing kids from the air, like basically around New Jersey, New York, or wherever you're doing it. You make it specific to your area. And because hotels don't want to know that trafficking's going on, or they might want to know, but there's, it's bad for business. And it can happen in a super cheap hotel. It can happen in a high-end hotel. And so the easy way to start the conversation is these kids are missing. And what happens to a lot of missing kids is the street life and trafficking. But I make the missing kids poster every time. And that is when I get it's very emotional for me. At the end of the day, it does help me feel like I'm doing something really good, because we have found kids, and there has been situations where they've been able, actually in Atlantic City, New Jersey, where they were able to start an operation to bust kind of a whole circuit, because it's not the people that are in the hotels. So we bring in these little bars of soap that have the human trafficking information on it. So if you're the victim, because you're a victim when it's happening, you're a survivor the minute you're coming out of that, right? I always like to make sure people know the word is survivor. They can put the soap label in their pocket and have the telephone number.
Wow.
But the poster, which I'm going to make next weekend, that's the one thing that takes a lot out of me. And then I do really feel like it's also empowering, because I know there's a chance that you're hoping to help people. The hardest thing about it is I have to decide who goes on it. But again, I try to look at it as you do what you can. And if you help one person, it's all worth it, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do. I really love that, because, my involvement has more been just in kind of like missions work. I mean, some homeless, support, and it feels really overwhelming. I mean, on one hand, some people have no idea just how much trafficking exists in the United States. Yeah. But then when you hear the stats, which I think actually it was, just a few Super Bowls ago when they really started to share just how much even like trafficking happens around the Super Bowl and in the city with the Super Bowl. And then you start to see those numbers. I mean, it is devastating. And so that can be really overwhelming.
Yeah, it's second to guns. It's the second. And the other so it is overwhelming, because humans can be reused. And that's when, that part can be, and if you're on the ground and doing the mission work, that's tough. But now, like you said, every Super Bowl the host city always has a human trafficking, coalition or support. They have like the part of the hospitality of hosting it is they have a human anti-trafficking division. And typically they bring in, my friend Teresa Flores, who started the SOAP project, who is a survivor of human trafficking from Michigan. So I'm fortunate enough too, where I know some awesome survivors, and they've been through a lot, and to know how wonderful and beautiful they are, it helps. Like, again, when you get that burnout, like you're saying, the part that gets tough, I think you think about these people now have a chance to heal if you can get there. But it's exhausting. I wouldn't say exhausting, but at the moment, emotionally, it can be really draining.
So you've done a lot on the front end, obviously the advocacy around lobbying for legislation that's going to help to fight against, to prevent. And then you've talked about work in the midst of, so things like this SOAP project, which, by the way, what an incredibly genius way to do that.
So you can.
Oh, that's awesome. So if you're watching this right now, you can see.
These are the bars of soap. And SOAP stands for Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution. And they have them in every state almost in the country. They have outreaches. So just in case anybody's watching and wants to get involved, I'm not on the national committee, but you can always direct message me on LinkedIn and I can hook you up with the people.
Oh, I'm going to make
So-
sure that we get a link to do that. I mean, I think that's pretty amazing. And what I love about that, by the way, is it's such a simple and subtle way, right? It's not just, you don't have to get into gear, get out on the streets and go for a prostitution ring bust or something like
No.
that, right?
We don't encourage anyone doing that ever, because you're at risk, and the person, the victim is not, when they're arrested, that criminal record doesn't go away unless you have a state that has expungement. And when they're released, because they're not the ringleader of the pimp or the ringleader of whatever you want to call it, they're in harm's way if they're arrested. So we don't encourage anyone to be like a vigilante, so to speak.
Yeah.
But if you, when we do actually the SOAP outreach, we let our local, and we encourage everyone to let their local police force know what's going on. And then if there's anyone that you see, you call the FBI or you call the national hotline or you call the local police force. Because like you said, if you go on the street, you get, I guess there's a sense of energy about it and you feel good about it, but you're really going to harm yourself and the other person.
Yeah.
So,
I never even really thought about that till right now, which is, so there could be, I mean, women particularly that are sold into or enslaved into becoming prostitutes that can then get arrested and be prosecuted for prostitution, even though they were actually forced into it. Is that true?
yes. Well, because at the time of the arrest, it's very hard to prove it's trafficking, right? Because if you're over the age of 18 and they could, it depends on, every state's different, but you could be arrested for prostitution. Under the age of 18, any type of sexual exploitation is considered trafficking. You don't, over age 18, you need force, fraud, or coercion. That's just the federal law. Most states follow that federal law and have their own state laws. But yeah, there's people that are arrested and let go for prostitution. It takes a very long time to build the case for the trafficking. And really the goal is to get the ringleaders, the real traffickers. Yeah. And then you have the issue of them not, the person, we'll just say the prostitute or whomever that gets arrested, they're not going to turn in their pimp because they'll get beaten up when they get released.
Yep.
Yeah. And the recidivism rate is very high. You know, like even if you can rescue them and move them into like a safe spot, there's a lot of grooming and things of love and belonging that has caused them to go into that world that they think they need to go back to it, and they'll try to go back into it. It's really. Yeah.
Which, I mean, and again, a poor choice of word, but it's so fascinating to think about what happens, you know, the impact of this, because again, like, you know, when you say grooming, you know, these poor women, like they're sold into this, they are enslaved into this, and they start to believe that this is who they are and that this is their place for acceptance and for care and provision. And you're right. I mean, it's so easy for them to just get sucked back into, this is who I am. This is all I know.
Right. And I think it can happen in many different ways. Like there's actually what's called familial trafficking, and that's where your family sells you. It can happen with runaways. It can happen blackmail trafficking, which my friend Teresa Flores went back a long time ago in Michigan. She was trafficked out of her house at night while she was in high school. But typically there's some reason that there's a vulnerability. So especially if you're a runaway or if you've had some traumas at home that, you know what ACEs are, they're acute childhood encounters. No, but they're now basically trauma, you know, and there's things that you can have trauma that will make you more vulnerable. And people identify these masterminds are evil, you know, they identify, they see these vulnerabilities, and then they'll say, oh, I'll buy you that. It could be buy you that cool pair of shoes, even starting with that. And then they turn around and say, now you need to repay me. As simple, like that can happen as a start, and then they're kind of into that life. It's not like in the TV shows where they're like whisked away. Now, it can happen where you're abducted and in that move to trafficking, but generally it's not in that form.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I have another question.
I want to be very sensitive. Sorry, because I'm a trained speaker on it, and I just want to make sure people know that there are all different types of trafficking, and there may be someone that watches it. And if you identify with any of this, again, reach out to there's services for you. And I'm sorry, but like there could be someone that doesn't even know they were trafficked, and they could watch it and say, "Oh crud," it could be triggering.
Yeah, actually, so that's part of what I'm interested to learn a little bit more about. So I think, again, that I'm trying to kind of play this idea of ignorance to some degree, because for most of us, that if you're watching this podcast or listening, you have grown up in, or you at least now live in some aspect of affluence, meaning that when we think about these issues, we typically impose these on impoverished communities, which absolutely it happens there. But I think that many of us don't believe. Like, I was surprised. I think I told you this when we first met, but I live in one of the wealthier communities of Southern California, even inside the Orange County, California, which is already an affluent community overall. I'm in a even more affluent area than that overall. I don't I don't participate in that at the moment, but I was surprised to learn about 10 years ago that our city, which is actually small in size, I can't remember our population right now, but fairly small in size, relatively affluent. I mean, there's just not like a poor person other than a transient that comes to our community. And yet we had one of the highest levels of trafficking in all of Southern California. And people would have put that on like a poor community, downtown LA community, like all kinds of things. And so what are some of the reasons, do you know, why this happens so much in these wealthier, more affluent communities?
I think that it happens everywhere, but because people don't expect it to happen, it could be part of it, because they're not aware. Like, you have to be aware. You never know what your neighbor's doing. And I always say, even if you're like, oh, it's not happening in my community, you could have a community where it's happening, but your neighbor's the one that is actually purchasing, not being the victim or potentially the survivor. I think that also now the biggest thing is online, especially after COVID, the issue with people are buying and selling people online. And you can't arrest someone for walking into someone's house. So let's say it happens, you walk into they know what's going on, but a kid walks into someone else's house. You can't go into the house and just arrest them. You have to have reason. So that's really tricky. I also think sometimes it can happen in affluent areas where it is more like the abduction, like the vans pulling up. Up in New York, they had a situation where they were called gypsies, and I don't really know what that. Like, it's not like what I think of as a gypsy, but there was, I actually was on vacation a couple years ago, and I don't know, I talk about this a lot apparently. And this people by the pool said, oh, and they were from a very affluent town up in New York. And they're like, our daughter they told me this whole story where their daughter was walking home from school and a van pulled up and they were like, get in. And she said no. And she actually had her phone in her hand, and you're supposed to walk the opposite way. If the car's coming towards, you go the opposite way. You don't walk with the car if they stop to you because they can't get out. But she ended up running home. They called the police, and she identified these people as people that had been like on a circuit of trying to convince people to get in. So that can happen. Like I said, it's not like in the movies, but it can happen. Yeah. So it's just crazy. And I think it's just because people can be bought and sold, like more than once, the sounds crude, and I don't mean to sound not nice, but the human body can be reused and reused and used. And when you sell a gun, it belongs to that person until they do the next thing with it.
Yeah.
I know this sounds terrible. When I first started working on this, people really didn't want to have dinner with me because they were like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well."
Yeah. Well, but again, I think that's why it's so incredibly important, because it is so easy for us to just avoid, ignore these topics because they're weighty, because they're so sad, because they're so uncomfortable or so awkward. But I mean, these are the things that we talk to our kids about all the time, which I now have a 21-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old daughter. But, even as parents, like you were saying, you don't know what your next door neighbor is doing. We never really let our kids go spend the night at other people's houses. It was like, which it's kind of funny that we would always welcome people to come spend the night at our house, but we never felt comfortable letting our girls especially go because we never knew what was going to happen. But I think that we need to step into these uncomfortable spots and talk about this more often, because if we don't, we are all just potential victims waiting to be victimized to one degree or another.
Yeah, I think you really need to let your kids know that bad things happen, right? Like I when my kids have grown up with the words human trafficking and what it is, just because it's just me and what I've been doing for so long. But they need to know, like, generally people are good and you're safe, but there are bad people. You just don't want to meet that 2 to 5%. That's not,
Yep.
The other advice that, again, I always mention Teresa Flores because she's just amazing, but she said the most important thing you can do with your kids is have a trusted adult that's not the parent. Meaning if something happens to the kid and they need to go to someone, it's not you or me as the parent they will come to, an adult they can trust and have an agreement and have them test it with the kids. Like, so I have a friend now that is a trusted adult, and I told my daughter, just tell her anything. Tell her the most absurd thing. She knows she can't tell me. And she'll help you work through, because then you have that. If something happened, let's say that you were spending the night and someone made advances even before it turns into something else, they can tell someone that won't say, oh, they didn't mean it. Like, this is someone that will take her seriously and she won't be afraid.
Oh, that's so good.
I don't know, because I'm like most parents, I'm like, oh, my kids can tell me anything. I'm like, your kids can have me as a trusted adult if they want. I mean, their friends can.
Yeah. No, that's super wise. Where do you see this going? I mean, where do you see these efforts going as we hopefully progress over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think there's been amazing things done since 2009, let's say, when I started, which means I've been doing this a very long time. Just even the fact that people never said the words human trafficking until probably right before we had the Super Bowl in New Jersey, which was 2015, I believe, 2013 or 15. Now, education awareness, like with everything, is the most important. The only way to stop trafficking is to get rid of demand, which is nearly impossible. There's all sorts of different things that have been proposed, whether you do a system where the sex trade is legal and recognized like they have in other countries, which there's all sorts of negatives too. And everyone has their own opinions. I just saying what we've looked at. Just figuring out ways to prosecute the ringleaders. Sometimes it's not even the pimps. That's why I keep saying ring. Whoever's the higher up, but also providing assistance to the victims and survivor services. The other thing that New Jersey's doing right now, because I'm on the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking. I'm a founding member, but I've removed myself a little from. I was very involved, so I'm not. I know what's going on, but I'm not. Believe me, it's the team that's doing all this, not me. Educating teachers in the education system, so they're aware, so they see the signs, and first responders. If we think about how far we've come with domestic violence, And how like before it used to be like, oh, there was just like a little argument and the police wouldn't investigate if they were called out, to having the nurses, the ER doctors, ER nurses, the staff see the signs, have hotel front desks see the signs. Those type of education and the skills to do something with it is the best way to help. Unfortunately, I don't know what's the answer to get rid of demand. You know, anytime there's a demand and it's making money, it's like the problem with, that's why guns and trafficking are number one, you know?
Yeah. No, it just continues to be what it is. Oh my gosh. Okay. So you have to find ways to get outside of this headspace and just take all your energy out in other areas. And I also know that on the lighter side of things, though maybe some people would say this is also a different form of punishment, you are quite the runner. And so tell me about your endeavors in running and why that has become such a, not just an outlet, but just such an energizer for you.
Well, I finally admit I'm a runner. Running, I identify as a runner. I've had a love-hate relationship with running most of my life. When I was younger, I was halfway decent at it, and I just liked to race. And then probably when I had my kids, running became my time. Because even if I had them in the jogging stroller, they couldn't talk. Like that was like my time.
They were blocked off from talking to you.
They had music in their jogging stroller, and that was my time. I never would get I still run outside, no treadmill, because I didn't want my time to be like in the garage or wherever the treadmill would be. Yeah. And then over the years, I swear almost every job I've had, I've gotten through running as an adult, just from random people or people I know, you know, just random talks. And I have a really good core group of running friends that are totally separate from my normal day. And they're just awesome. And they're crazier. I'm like an average runner to them. Like some of them do ultra marathons. They're amazing. So, you know, it's kind of like the goofier you are, the more entertaining it is. And we go run and just, I don't know. It's kind of funny. It's just become part of me, and everyone's like, oh, the running. So yeah, now, and that's been going on a long time. Like I have friends from when I lived in New York, still from running, and we do the marathon every year together, which some people would say crazy, but that's how we get together once a year.
Oh my gosh. So marathon distance, is that kind of your sweet spot?
As I get older, it's getting there. I was an 800-meter runner in college, so I would never have said that. Yeah. I like the half marathon. I love New York Marathon because I love that. I just nostalgia when I go through New York, but marathoning isn't for me. I just am weird enough to like love doing long runs with my friends.
And so what's the average run that you're doing now?
I usually go like 5 or 6 miles a day. And then once a week, you'll see on Instagram, I do 10 miles every Friday with the crew. And so it's like our LinkedIn, I've been putting on my Friday 10 before we get the weekend, ready for the weekend. Get all the stuff done.
Oh my gosh, that is a lot of running.
Yeah. It's been dark and cold out too. I don't live in Southern California.
I know. Well, it's actually, funny enough, we have had more rain this year than we've ever had. And it's kind of dark and rainy here too. But yeah, what do you do when it's awful weather like half the year there? You don't run inside. So what do? You run in the rain?
I like gear.
Oh my, so you are crazy. Now I know. You're wild for sure. Oh, okay. So I'm super appreciative again. Just scratched the surface in Miami, still really only kind of just a little bit of a deeper scratch into the surface here. But the fact that you discounted this when we first talked and you tried to do it again, it's the team, it's not you. I get it. But the work that you are doing is it's incredible. And I'm super grateful because I pray that there's at least, you talked about impacting one. I pray that there is one person listening to this that will find some sense of hope because of some similar scar or wound maybe that they experienced, and that there's going to be one other person at least that this is going to be an awakening to them to gain more awareness for the ways in which this is happening in their local community, and we'll do something about it. But if you weren't willing to have these conversations, if you weren't willing to advocate, we wouldn't be here. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate your time too. And I'm with you on praying for those little nuggets of chipping away.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, one at a time. And guess what? You are landing the plane on your first ever podcast, and you just crushed it. Now you can add that to your bio somewhere. I'm a podcast pro.
Podcast slub.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much. We will make sure to put your contact information into the show notes. You guys, if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, please reach out to Sue. Just, you can connect with her, ask her questions. I'm sure she can point you in the direction of local areas of advocacy in the places that you live. Check out that SOAP project. I love that idea so much. But I think that there's just many ways to get involved if that's what you desire. So please make sure to reach out to her. If you have any questions for me, thoughts, concerns, needs, you know where to find me. Thank you guys so much for continuing to endure some really tough conversations, because as much as we want to also be lighthearted and have some fun with it, these are serious things that people are being impacted with and dealing with. But it takes conversations like this to bring awareness and the impact that people hope for. So thank you guys for supporting. Thanks for enduring another episode of Authentic Conversations. We will talk to you guys soon.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Authentic Conversations. If you are ready to live the life you've dreamed of, I'm here to help. Head to ryanjamesmiller.com/podcast to begin your journey. And if this episode impacted you in any way, pay it forward by sharing it with someone you know. I'm Ryan James Miller, and I'll see you next time on Authentic Conversations.